Many of us are accustomed to some type of facial recognition. It's how we open our phones, tablets, even our computers. Well, now law enforcement leaders are considering using this technology to solve crimes. Kara talked with Chris Kaiser of the ACLU about how it could impact crime in Louisiana.
So can you give us an overview of what facial recognition actually is?
Sure. So in its most basic form, facial recognition refers to basically a software program, an algorithm that takes certain measurements of people's faces, compares them to images of other human faces, and then tries to figure out which images are most similar to the face it was comparing it to. In common parlance, people talk about facial recognition sometimes to mean many different things. For example, there's a one-to-one comparison that, for example, an iPhone does when you use it to open your phone, where you're just verifying whether one face is the same as one other image of a face that's on file, just to verify that somebody's the same person. Up the chain, police, for example, will use facial recognition to compare an image they have to a vast gallery of human faces, and then try to identify which person among that gallery they're looking at. And then taken to an even further extreme, you have examples where camera systems across cities or countries will constantly monitor people's movements throughout that space and continuously identify who is moving through that space based on the comparisons to an image gallery.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, for the most part, people are familiar with facial recognition because, like you said, we do use it on our phones, our tablets, our computers. But, law enforcement and other agencies may up the ante by trying to use it to maybe solve crimes. Now, a year ago, whenever I spoke to the ACLU, some people were raising concerns about facial recognition. What are those concerns now, and are they still relevant?
They're absolutely still relevant. And I guess I would group our concerns into maybe three categories. First of all, when the city of New Orleans was considering using facial recognition, one of our top concerns was simply that there's no evidence that shows that facial recognition or other types of surveillance actually deter crime or make us safer in the community. And a lot of the arguments behind using this tool comes from concerns about violence in our community, which are very real concerns. But when it comes to violent crime, there's no evidence whatsoever that suggests that surveillance can deter that or make us safer. And so one of the concerns is simply that the focus on these new shiny tools is a distraction from the real solutions that we need for our communities. And more broadly, this also has the potential to normalize massive invasions of privacy. I mentioned before that when police use facial recognition, they're comparing images to vast galleries of millions and millions of photographs. That may come from government issued IDs and things in state databases, but it might also come from things that are just scraped from social media or publicly available on the internet. And so I don't think that many people appreciate that just walking around in our daily lives doing what we do, we're already part of a lineup, basically. That the police are looking at your photo, my photo, and comparing that whenever they're looking for a suspect. So it's very different from a few decades ago when we just relied on eyewitness identification. They're comparing these images to yours and mine at all times. And it's a serious threat to privacy and First Amendment rights.
Well, seeing as how, we discussed this earlier in the interview, it's something that you use in your phone, your computer, all your tablets. What do you think the future of this technology is going to look like? Do you think those biases will eventually be straightened out, or is this something that'll continue to be a problem as we go into the future?
It's unclear. I think there are questions for our society and our city governments about, do we want to open the floodgates for police to use any and all new technology just because we have concerns about public safety in our community? There are real debates to be had about how much privacy we want to sacrifice and whether these solutions actually prevent or reduce violence in our communities. But as it stands, what we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, is that cities have kind of not been interested in having that debate and are more willing just to give police what they say they need. And we're going to see how that plays out over the next few years. But it's our position, obviously, that we need to pump the brakes on this, probably put a moratorium on the use of facial recognition when people's liberty is on the line, and see what restrictions actually need to be put in place before we allow it. Folks hear about this technology and you're familiar with it on your iPhone, for example, but don't really appreciate how vast the scope is, how much of each of our personal information is being brought into this funnel that the state can then compare images to. Well, I think people think about it as if you're under investigation, then maybe you have something to worry about, but if not, you don't. But we're entering this age where so much of our information is out there in public, available to the state, probably already in the possession of the state, and we're already walking around basically part of a lineup. That's a serious concern for privacy, and it's something that state and local governments need to take seriously.
So like you said, I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about this in the future as this technology becomes readily available for law enforcement. So thank you so much for talking with us, and hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now, the New Orleans City Council reinstated the use of it last summer after banning it in 2020. New Orleans police say the technology would be used fairly.